Hello everyone. My name is Aeon or Dragon with Dreamforge TTRPG. Some of you may know that we've been playing test sessions in the background as we work on Dreamforge and its main content, and that soon we're planning on playing in a main campaign that'll be posted on the channel, that main camp being Cursed Sea Gem. Since we're planning on starting the main campaign, Cursed Sea Gem, soon, I wanted to fill everyone in on some of the major events that's happened in the test sessions, or I should call it, a test for the future adventure, to catch people up to speed on what's been happening over that time. You may be wondering, Aeon, why exactly are you doing this as opposed to uploading all the sessions themselves to the channel for everyone to see? And honestly, the reason why is the adventure should have been called a test for our goddamn sanity because of how many technical difficulties we had when recording this shit. Suffice to say, we had a lot of issues with it. The more we played, the better we got and adjusted to the technical problems and such. Just maybe took us about 20 sessions or so. But anyways, to ensure that we can use the recorded content for something, I'm going to be using some of the B-roll from those sessions in the background. Just no really commentary except for a few small clips and such like that that kind of pop up. And meanwhile, during the rest of this video, I plan on going through a brief summary of most of the main story events that kind of happened or transpired in general over the course of our adventure, as well as a few little funny best bits or clips like that that kind of can be thrown in as I'm talking. So before we begin the kind of main summary section of this video, I'm going to talk about real quick the actual characters involved, or more specifically, us, the team, you know, the people playing. However, if any additional main people show up or are kind of prevalent in the brief summary, I'll also give like a brief summary about who they are when that comes up, so yeah. So to start us off, I play Starsha, a Galeful Tale who carries herself in a somewhat pragmatic and aloof way, who hails from the misty mountains of Gara. She's a guardian who thinks herself not the best person in some lights, but a person who needs to get things done nonetheless. She's a fair bit smug and usually has a plan ready for almost anything. While on the outside she can also be a little bit rather disaffected, she's coming to find out that she's got a bit of a softer side and a slight bit more considerate than she might have initially thought herself to be. Next up is a character that Eli plays. You probably heard him in some of the other videos. He plays Marliana, a cheerful tomboyish Aquian girl who is always excited and loves to try new things. She's a martial artist from somewhere within the Tide Pack portions of Lapsus, or I guess I should say the Consortium, who trains hard and lives for a challenge. She's not got the best social etiquette, but honestly only one of us on the team really kinda does currently, especially not the dragon, but nonetheless she wants to explore the world and is kind of avoiding her past in some ways. Next up is Magellan, played by our resident Southern Ranger, Toki. Magellan ain't no city slicker. He's a devilkin drifter from the seas around the Gobi northwestern areas. He's a blast gladiator and a former bounty hunter who's seen his fair share of faces and fights. Who tries to keep an ironclad composure, though kinda fails at it, not gonna lie, and an agile trigger finger. Gotta be careful doing that, because I can actually get stuck in that voice. After that, we have Gathor Windraft, played by our lovely DM, Lily. Gathor is a Drakeshore mystic, who hails from the lands of dragons in southwestern Dogma. She's a former racing dragon whose demeanor shifts between skittish, confident, and volatile, depending on who reigns her mind. She's somewhat meek and brings an air of unpredictability to the party, usually caused by her sudden outbursts brought on by hunger. And lastly is Homie Jones, a kitsune played by Shrimp, or Lewis, who has a penchant for property damage and not liking Lapsus, or at least the Consortium part of Lapsus, I should say. It may have something to do with him being kind of a former Garan military officer, and seeing the aftermath of the whole Garan coast burning thing the Consortium did. Anyways, he's upbeat and thinks himself a suave man, ready to take the chaffarade by the horns in most interactions. He acts quite foolhardy and cocksure, but actually is quite considerate and bizarrely resourceful, despite his, general presentation. Alright, and with all that out of the way, we've now set up our characters. Now it's time for a brief summary of Dreamforge, a test for the future. In the beginning of our adventure, all of us would receive a letter left near our resting place. Upon looking at the letter, we would discover our presence had been expressly suggested to participate in some sort of evaluation of our abilities and skills for the future. Though since it was relatively vague and many of us were quite tired, we elected to ignore it. and go to sleep. Little did we know, the interest in our expressed acceptance was more of an informed compliance, as we shortly would discover the next morning. Awakening within an inn in the town of Qual'd in the Lapis province of the Consortium, we would all realize that somehow, despite all of our presence scattered across Drakkar, we were all now here, with new faces we did not recognize. After some initial greetings and growing pains, comments on cuteness, and Homie's first bout of property damage jumping out of the windows into the horse stables.
From what you assume, it's not somebody's home. It looks like it's a hotel of some kind. Because there's not very much, like, personal knickknacks lying around.
And jump out the window.
Oh boy. As this random person is in the room, I'm gonna kind of like, as they're running against the window, I'm going to like yell out, what are you doing in here?
Leaving, and I break through the window.
Are you gonna, you're not opening it, you're just going through the window?
I'm not about to get probed.
We would take stock in the situation and find a new letter waiting for us near our bedside. There was immediate indication that this letter had been written by the same person, mainly due to the signature on it, and outlined that we had been brought here to investigate some strange happenings in the Qual'd area, and that our skills in doing so would be evaluated in this testing ground for the future. Unbeknownst to us, however, the words testing grounds would be more telling than we realized. Well, initially, something felt immediately odd about the town and generally the situation we were in. You know, the whole abduction thing. We only had really one real direction provided to us, and, for lack of a better term, things seemed weirdly calm despite everything. So we decided to go on the only lead we currently had, and that being the guild hall that was outlined in the message as a place of some importance here in Qual'd. Upon arriving at the guild hall, we would meet the head guild attendant for the entire southern Lapis area, and a person who would become intertwined with the party's shenanigans and more specifically Starsha. Fari Everwin, a Kitsune guardian from Gara, with a kindred soul whose intelligence, beauty, and calm demeanor brings both joy and tenacity to those around her. She is a former Garan soldier who decided to join the guild union's engineering branch and later act as a guild attendant to help mainly with restoring the rather restless lands of Lapsis. Soon after meeting her, we would discover that attached to our letter was a guild officer seal, allowing us to take on guild quests as a temporary guild team of adventurers, with even special privileges. Though we and Fari could not ascertain whose sigil exactly was on our message, its authenticity was without question due to the magical signature which was placed upon it. Though Starsha would ask Fari to look into the specifics of who the sigil belonged to, the party, feeling their pockets were quite light at the moment, in a new place they didn't know, would take the opportunity to do some guild quests that were on the board nearby. The first combat went mostly well, aside from a few minor accidents.
Starsha just like hand on her head, just oh shit.
It's gonna say hello here in a moment. Hello there.
I got something for its ass. Go ahead and try and nip me.
Oh, hey,
oh my god.
Oh no.
Well, TKO incoming.
That's
The
11
wolves-
damage.
The wolves have God on their side.
Extra 2d6,
Or
right?
2d6 actually, yep.
For the next couple of days, we would complete a few more small quests, clearing out some wolves, surveying around the town, and becoming more acquainted with the area in general. At some point during our time, we individually noticed a second letter along with our initial one that we had found that first day. These letters were special, as they weren't written by the same person we initially met, and they each had a secret, a point of major trauma, or a concern that had not been disclosed to the party, let alone anyone else. Suspicions would very quickly reach a head, and eventually a confrontation would occur, in which the main writer of the second letter was revealed. The culprit, Gathor Windraff, and with this reveal, an even stranger one. Gathor had been in an accident several months prior to this situation we all found ourselves in. This incident had resulted in her fusing with the presumed alternate time version of herself. This version of Gathor was aggressive and angered, leaving the Gathor we knew in a crisis of identity. Additionally, they had met an untimely fatal end at the hands of Starsha, and the team ultimately failed in whatever actions they had been doing with the other Thor. Though things were tense initially, details were somewhat sparse, and after deliberating with each other, the party elected to, well, not act out of hand. As realistically speaking, as Starsha and Magellan put it, nothing negative between them had actually happened yet, and the situation garnered them working together for the moment at least. After this event, the next day, the party would swiftly receive an urgent quest from the Guild Union about an attack occurring on a pair of vessels in the nearby Qual'd River. Acting fast, the party would head out to the river, encountering a ship fighting off a group of Uldur, these yellow spongy-hide leviathan beasts, which had been assaulting the ship for some odd reason. Quickly taking care of them, the party would board the ship and help out the injured, asking questions about what had occurred. Before they could ascertain the full situation, however, they would be assaulted again, this time by strange dark-colored water elemental creatures, with flesh and bone within their watery mass. They seemed to have an extreme aversion to the damage that Starsha could use, namely lunar damage, and were swiftly dealt with by Homie's fiery martial arts and Magellan's sniping from above on the mast. Following the fight, the party would meet with a consortium spellcaster who had been stationed on the other ship which was destroyed, along with a man named Guy, who was, we'll just say, less than competent to say the least. They would be informed about a strange sound and an odd sensation that was felt, followed by what Guy called Big Black Betty, some form of creature which had been commanding the water chimera in Uldur. While it had been some information, the party didn't have much to act on immediately. However, shortly after this happened, and within the same area even, the party would meet their second most influential person for this adventure, a man named Brian Bond. Brian Bond is a rather fit and slightly taller than average dwarven man with a sense of alertness and sturdiness in his morals and sense of justice. He appeared to us initially as a private investigative journalist who was looking into the strange happenings occurring as of late within the town. The party, in their general careful and secretive nature, elected to take his business card but keep a wide berth of him, for the time being at least. The conversation with him and the others would prove fruitful, however, as they would receive a lead to a nearby district of the town that had been subject to much discourse as of late, the awhile district. The awhile district is a place predominantly composed of beastkin outside the regular bounds of the town. It had been lauded by many of the people in the more human and elven side of the wealthy portion of town as an impoverished trash heap with little redeeming qualities and due in need of a cleaning out or left to rot. Though for some reason it seemed some of them were referring potentially more to the people rather than the infrastructure. After a few hours, the party would decide to travel their way to the awhile district themselves. There they would see that most of what they had heard had been lies, and there they would also meet their third and other primary ally, Greyfang, a lizardkin man who owns the Fluffy Bar, a hot spot in the area for work and rumors. He is a rather secretive and suspicious sort, matching the party's mindset, who prides themselves on being in the know on most things around the Qual'd area, and keeping beast cannon people of the awhile area alert and aware of most of the ebbs and flows of the unsettling social environment around the town. In our case, Greyfang had information the party might need in finding out what was happening in the town and why they were brought here in the first place. For Greyfang, the party had eyes and insight on what was happening around the town that he didn't and couldn't find around himself. For both groups, the only question was how reliable were they, and how much could either of them trust each other. To answer this, the party would take an off-the-record quest for Greyfang to procure some merchandise he had heard word about being lost in an Avalis ship incident in the nearby river. Despite the circumstantial nature of the incident, the party, feeling that this was their only primary lead, would accept the offer and chance at finding out more. So, the next morning, the party would head out on a raft given to them by Greyfang. Very quickly, they would find the believed wreckage of the Avalis ship. However, they were not alone. What Homie had decided not to tell the rest of the party during this time was that they were being tailed by another ship, one that would reveal itself to be a ship full of pirates, called the Cleaner Uppers. Despite the ambush, the Cleaner Uppers would very quickly reveal themselves to be more of the Starter Uppers, as they were completely out of their depths, no pun intended. Within a few moments, they would be subdued by the party, and their captain, Rochelle, Rachel, Rebecca, whatever, would be rizzed by Homie, I still cannot believe we didn't throw him overboard for this, into standing down. After they had given up, they would reveal they had actually done no pirating as of yet, and were doing this work out of economic desperation after some recent consortium downturns. They had been hired for a lot of money to survey the area until further notice by an unknown benefactor, and it was very quickly apparent that they had been set up to take the fall as raiding pirates who destroyed a vessel when the party or consortium military would arrive to take them down. Starsha, upon realizing the pirates were feeling baited and realizing their lives were forfeit to their employer, made the compelling proposition to help us in Greyfang, or maybe swim back without a ship. Speech seemed to be at 100 that day, as the party would quickly dive and scour the destroyed vessel, finding the bronze lockbox that was their quarry, as well as return back with the pirates in tow, now as their acquaintances. Once back, the party would deliberate with the pirates in Greyfang, as they discovered the contents of the lockbox suggested some foul play between the Church of Avalis and an unnamed governor within the consortium. Additionally, it appeared the pirates had not been the ones who fell the ship, and after speaking with Greyfang, neither had Greyfang's contact. With the question spiraling, the party would elect to rest on the information for a few days, doing more quests and getting a feel for the local issues at play, or relaying information between Greyfang Fari, until a lead would arise. For the most part, the next several days would be more tame, giving the party some much-needed time to get to know each other's quirks and vibes. The party would initially take on a mining quest for the local excavators and a smith. There they would discover the consortium's lack of adjustable apparel for non-immortals, and multiple members of the party, namely Starsha, Marliana, and Homie, would have to literally break in the PPE they were given to work for their body's additional traits to fit. Take that as you will. Along with this would be the discovery of Marliana's general uncouth nature to social norms, as she began partially changing out in the open, having to be stopped by the party. And from then, Homie and Marliana's extreme physical endurance and Marliana's fixation with training and challenges would become more apparent as the fitness nuts would go outdoing everyone in an attempt to complete the task before each other could. A night later, the party would take a quest from the guild to clear out a group of Feator, attacking travelers in the area. The quest would go well, however the party would notice something odd as they neared further out from the town, a wall of fog on the borders surrounding the area, which no matter how much they tried, they could not pass. With every attempt, they would appear from the same side, and the subtle realization formed that they, along with everyone else in the town, was trapped within the confines of this fog wall. However, seeing no way to immediately deal with the wall at the moment, the party would return to the guild hall and attempt to calmly broach the situation, only to realize that no one would respond or acknowledge what they told them about the wall. With a looming dread at the realization that no one in the area seemed to be able to comprehend the wall's presence, the party would elect to let sleeping dogs lie, for now at least. A couple of days later, the party would receive another urgent quest from the guild. A group of ecological researchers had been active in the area studying some odd patterns in the ecosystem and ecology. They had disappeared, and the party would need to follow their trail, going after a dire cockatoo the researchers had tagged for a hunt request. Fari would remark to be careful as she had a bad feeling, and Greyfang would contact the party as well, sending a message that some of their Alto Latel contacts nearby had been reporting beasts in the area becoming more aggressive and sickly. Before they could get themselves ready to go on this quest, however, Gathor, who had not been present the entire morning, would enter the guild hall, tripping over themselves in the distraught haze of shaking fear. She would begin pulling the party towards the forest nearby, saying that they needed to see something immediately. The look of concern from Fari and genuine terror in Gathor's eyes sparked something within them, as they acted quickly and left the guild hall to make their way into the forest. It wouldn't take long for them to discover what had left Gathor in such a state. Entering a particular thicket of the trees, we would find some strange sights as a kind of massive fight had occurred nearby here. The entire area was severely damaged with upturned trees, massive craters, and scars across the ground. Strangely, there seemed to be no signs of creatures, only damaged machinery from what initially was thought to be constructs, and odd blue cubes seemingly pooling in certain areas around the damaged scenery. There was also one other oddly disturbing thing, an eerie quiet and the residue of a strange black quartz substance on the ground. While some of us, namely Marliana and Homie, seemed particularly interested in getting closer, though cautious, Gathor and Starsha seemed to immediately have some kind of reaction, an instinctual fear or disgust, an urge to attack. Starsha would fight out this feeling and manage to keep her senses about her, and with Homie's assistance, managed to grab some samples of the residue in a small nugget of the black quartz in a pouch using gloves, and not a moment too soon. It began as a slight tearing sound, like paper being ripped in someone's hands in a slow crawl. Everyone's head turned on a swivel towards that noise, a slow dread racing up their backs. As if to meet the feeling of looming worry, the forest grew even more quiet. The slow crawl of tearing began to draw louder, and within a few moments it was deafening, like a ship crashing upon land. We prepared ourselves to fight, however, as we stared towards the sound's source, our shaky defiance collapsed almost instantly. A black and green tear erupted in the space suspended by the tree nearby. It was as if the world had begun unfolding upon itself, and as if on instinct, we all knew what we needed to do, and immediately ran, Marliana grabbing Gathor's petrified frame, while the others ensured that we could keep moving. Ripping through the forest, we would steal a glance back, seeing the abyss of black stretching a gangly arm towards us. We continued running, hearing the sounds of something large and metallic slamming down behind us, and the inhuman screams of what followed. We would only stop to take a moment's break once we had heard the normal woodland sounds of animals and felt the faint breeze blowing against our faces. This had been the signal that whatever had been transpiring, at least we were safe for now. This would be our first encounter with what we would soon become acquainted with, the interloper entity. After getting our bearings, we realized we still had a job to do, and avoided that certain area in the forest where the incident had occurred. Making our way along the trail, we would encounter a group of Theator, which seemed to be acting quite odd. Upon engaging with them, instead of coordinating and attacking, they would instead recklessly lash out against us, flailing and failing easily. While the party deliberated on if our skills had merely been improving, we would be set upon by the large avianous beast, the dire cockatoo. Though the battle would become more difficult with the added strength of this major threat, the party would nonetheless come up on top. Afterwards, the party would check in with Fari via transceiver device and begin investigating the bodies of the creatures. Very quickly, they began noticing the peculiar oddities about the creatures. Purplish veins bulging from their bodies and discolored purple and red eyes, with erratic movements and irritation. A strange dark purple substance under their claws and hardening off their wounds. The party would also find a trail left by what looked to be the other researchers, and Fari would send them additional medical support as they would begin their investigation further into where these tracks led. The party, finding signs that Uldor had been present in the area, would follow the tracks and eventually lead them to some area on the riverbanks. Homie would notice some strange forms floating in the water and began swimming out to get a closer look. This would prove to be a costly decision, as before long the party was caught in a battle as Honi garnered the attention of Uldor swimming in the water nearby, and the creatures seemed to be a bit further along in their affliction status than the previous one we had been fighting before. While the fight would seem manageable initially, as we kept our distance from things would take a turn for the worse when their Omega entered the fray, the Prime Uldor. Magellan would nearly be taken out by a mighty attack from the creature, and Homie had been looking rather worse from wear after a couple of large attacks from it and its brood as well. The fight would be a back and forth for some time, with Marliana and Gathor being too far to add support at the initial point of the fight. However, with some quick planning from Starsha, she would have Homie act as a decoy for a moment to draw the creature in, hitting it with a moonbeam and drawing its attention immediately back to her. This would prove fatal for the creature, however, as it immediately began charging towards her and slamming into her with all of its might. At that point, she would grab onto the creature, smirking with a gleeful bit of humor and pleasure at a good plan coming to fruition, as in a flash, she illuminated her body with lightning and a shocking retort, blasting the creature, and with all the damage the party had been putting into it, along with Starsha's lightning, the creature would fall limp, scorched and sparked in the water. The party, getting through their toughest fight yet, would call Fari back, asking for some assistance from the guild to get their quarry and research specimen's corpse back to base as they took a rest. When they would return to the guild hall, they would be informed of the affliction that these creatures were suffering with, and that was currently in their system. BOS, which stands for Blight of Soul, an odd illness which had been seemingly springing randomly across the world in different areas, which the guild and other groups had tried to keep quarantined. Its appearance here meant that it was beginning to surge in this area and perhaps more parts of Lapsus. They were told while the information was sparse, the party should have received too little of an exposure for any long BOS lasting effects. With that explanation, the party, in dire need of some R&R, would elect to sleep on the matter. In the morning after the battle with the Prime Uldor, the party would partially split, deciding to relax a bit this day. Starsha and Homie would head to the guild hall early, as Starsha wanted to investigate the BOS substance, and Homie wanted to carve some creatures that they had felt the other days prior. Meanwhile, Marliana and Gathor would share a moment in the morning. Marliana would begin her morning checking in with the normally morning cranky Gathor. However, upon awakening, Gathor would seem strangely astute and very affectionate. This would fluster the rather uncouth Aquian girl, as she had no sense of attraction or romance, despite somewhat growing feelings for Gathor in the recent days. Gathor's usually rather meek and insular demeanor had changed to one that was oddly playful and cheery, and notably less flustered, rather being more assertive and actualized. They would spend the morning relaxing and becoming more accustomed to each other's interest. All the while, Magellan would fake sleeping as to not disturb the two girls' moment together, like a true gentleman. Also, the necrotic energy was keeping him from doing much, and once they had realized that he was awake and was somewhat suffering with the injury, they aptly took him to the wellness center nearby and continued the rest of their day together, relaxing in the town. Meanwhile, at the guild hall, Starsha would invite Fari on a brief walk outside the town to satiate her suspicion about the fog wall. While on the walk, Starsha and Fari would get to know each other better, talking about the recent actions, their past, and all the while, Fari playfully teasing Starsha, and strangely, the normally rigid and somewhat standoffish Starsha began to realize she was becoming quite comfortable and enjoying the time that she was spending with Fari. When she reached the fog wall, once again, Fari was unable to visibly see it, and Starsha was unable to enter through it, just like last time. Fari could see the frustration slightly appearing on Starsha's face, and suggested that entering the area together with Starsha, holding their hand. At this final attempt, they would enter the fog together, but only for a brief few moments, as Starsha would feel Fari disappear suddenly, and see a screen appear with an error message in front of her face. Before Starsha could begin running after the direction she felt Fari disappear, a hologram would appear before her. It would then express that if she would stop messing with the out-of-bounds area, he would explain what's happening. The hologram would identify themselves as Watcher CNX, and some other numbers. It doesn't really matter at the moment. The man who wrote the initial letters and who brought the party to this place to begin with. He would then go on to explain that the party is in a simulated space, a form of demiplane, made for them to test the party's capabilities for the future. While the Watcher would stress that most of the decisions they've made and the people thus far they've met were in this simulated space, they would allude to the idea that most of their minds, or the minds of at least several individuals in the town, were in fact real, just like they were, and they could experience and have drawbacks to things, depending on what the party does. He explained that they were kept in some form of suspended animation, a trance if you would. Despite the explanations and assurances that most things they didn't need to concern themselves with in the simulation, Starsha would notice something seemed off about the man's explanation. Why had he been so imperative about their choices mattering in the simulated space initially? And why did he seem like there was something they weren't telling them? After some pressing, she would get one final foreboding answer from him. He explained that the technology they were using was new, and while he wouldn't reveal exactly whose organization he was a part of, it didn't directly mean them ill will. Normally, it would be as if they all had a bad dream, if anything particularly bad happened. Everyone's cognition would be reconnected to their main bodies, and it would seem as if nothing ever happened. However, something else out of their control was in this simulated space along with the party, acting as if they could, and doing much more damage than they could conceive. Something disrupting things, peeling at the frayed edges of the space. Something that they had encountered before, the interloper entity. Though they were not sure exactly how it entered this space, or exactly what it's trying to do here, they're trying to do their best to isolate it and see if they can extract everyone out of the area without harm back to their normal bodies. He is worried that whatever it is has more effects on reality here than they might realize, and with that warning, he would vanish, remarking to avoid bringing this up to others in the town, as the more mentions of this entity seemed to cause odd events and ruptures across the space and minds of the creatures inside here. As the fog would clear, Starsha would be left with Fari in the forest, though closer to the town this time. Understanding the gravitas of the situation, she elected to stay silent on the matter, and Fari, seemingly realizing that something was bothering Starsha, but was unable to get any answers from her, would simply act playfully and considerate, somewhat to distract Starsha from what she knew was bothering her. Alright, that's been our summary for Origin Team's last several sessions in the Test for the Future. I skipped over some things and kept things relatively brief. But with all that, now you're caught up and ready for session 19 and onward. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you in the next video. Toodles, everyone.